The harsh crack of a whip silenced the rowdy crowd gathered at Redemption Creek's makeshift auction block as Eleanor Willoughby struggled against the rough hemp sack obscuring her face and the bindings cutting into her wrists. The year was 1875, and being sold like cattle was never how she imagined her journey west would end. Margaret Wilson couldn't breathe. The burlap sack over her head scratched against her skin, the smell of mildew and earth suffocating her as she stood trembling on the auction platform. Just 3 weeks ago, she had been traveling west by stagecoach to become a schoolteacher in California, her trunk filled with books and dreams. Now, after the stagecoach robbery that had killed the driver and left her at the mercy of bandits, she was merchandise. Next up, gentlemen, a fine young woman, unspoiled and educated from back east. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the dusty square of Thunder Ridge, Montana territory. Perfect for any man needing a wife or household help. Bidding starts at $50. Margaret could hear the jeers and whistles through the rough fabric. Her education at Miss Porter's School for Young Ladies in Connecticut hadn't prepared her for this horror. Her parents, both now deceased, would be mortified to see their only daughter reduced to property. $50, someone shouted from the crowd. 60, called another. 75, a slurred voice added, followed by raucous laughter. The tears that had been threatening spilled down Margaret's cheeks, soaking into the rough material. She had survived the attack on the stagecoach by playing dead, only to be discovered later by a different group of outlaws who saw opportunity in her fine clothes and Eastern accent. $100, a deep voice cut through the clamor, silencing the crowd momentarily. $100 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 120? The auctioneer sounded gleeful. 150. The same voice countered firmly. Margaret strained to hear, to understand who might be purchasing her and what fate awaited. 150 going once, going twice, sold to Mr. Ironwood. Rough hands guided her off the platform. She stumbled, her legs weak from standing for hours. The summer heat had made the sack a torturous oven, and dehydration had left her dizzy and disoriented. "I'll take her from here," said the same deep voice that had placed the winning bid. Margaret felt herself being passed from one set of hands to another, these more gentle, but no less firm. She heard the exchange of money, the rustle of paper that represented the bill of sale. Her stomach churned at the idea of a human being sold with no more ceremony than a horse or cow. "Come along," the man said quietly, guiding her with a hand on her elbow. They walked for what seemed like forever, Margaret stumbling occasionally on the uneven ground. Finally, they stopped. She heard a door open, felt herself guided inside a building. The air was cooler here, smelling of leather and coffee. "Let me help you with that," the man said, and she felt his fingers at the rope around her neck that secured the sack. Margaret tensed. What would her new owner do when he saw her? Would he be disappointed? Angry? Worse? The sack lifted away, and fresh air rushed against her skin. She blinked rapidly, adjusting to the sudden light after hours of darkness. Before her stood a tall man, perhaps 30 years of age, with sun-bronzed skin and the most startling blue eyes she had ever seen. He wore the practical clothing of a rancher, a simple cotton shirt, denim trousers, and a well-worn leather vest. No fancy gambler's attire or the filthy rags of the town drunks who had been bidding. His eyes widened slightly as he took in her face, and he whispered, almost reverently, "An angel." Margaret wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. She stared back, uncertain and afraid. The man seemed to catch himself, clearing his throat and stepping back. "Forgive me. My name is August Ironwood. You're safe now, Miss Wilson," she said, her voice raspy from thirst. "Margaret Wilson." August Ironwood nodded, turning to pour water from a pitcher into a tin cup. "Here," he said, offering it to her. "You must be parched." Margaret's bound hands came up awkwardly to take the cup. August frowned at the sight of the ropes. "Let me get those off you," he said, pulling a knife from his belt. Margaret flinched instinctively, and he paused. "I won't hurt you, Miss Wilson. You have my word." There was something in his steady gaze that made her believe him. She extended her wrists, and with quick, careful movements, he sliced through the bindings. "Thank you," she murmured, rubbing her chafed skin before accepting the water. She drank greedily, not caring about proper etiquette. "Slow down," he cautioned. "Too much too fast will make you sick." She nodded, forcing herself to sip more carefully. Looking around, she realized they were in a small but tidy office. A desk stood against one wall, papers neatly stacked upon it. A bookshelf filled with volumes lined another wall, an unexpected sight in a frontier town. "Is this your office, Mr. Ironwood?" "It is. I'm the law in Thunder Ridge." Margaret nearly choked on her water. "You're the sheriff?" He nodded, touching the silver star pinned to his vest that she hadn't noticed before. "I am." "But you bought me," she said, confusion evident in her voice. "How can an officer of the law participate in human trafficking?" August's expression darkened. "I didn't buy you, Miss Wilson. I saved you. That auction was illegal, and the men responsible will be dealt with. But I've learned in my time here that sometimes the direct approach isn't the wisest. If I'd tried to stop the auction, there would have been gunfire, and you might have been hurt in the chaos." Hope flickered in Margaret's chest. "So I'm not your property?" "No one is property, Miss Wilson. Not here, not anywhere in this country, not anymore. The war settled that a decade ago, though some folks out here seem to have missed the news." Relief made her knees buckle, and August quickly guided her to a chair. "Easy now," he said, his voice gentle. "You're free to go wherever you please. But first, I'd like to hear how you came to be in this situation, if you're willing to tell me." Margaret nodded, gathering her thoughts. "I was traveling to California. I have had a position as a schoolteacher waiting in Sacramento. The stagecoach was attacked 2 weeks into the journey. The driver was killed, as was an elderly gentleman traveling with us. I played dead when one of the bandits checked me for valuables." August listened intently, his expression grim. "They took everything of value and left. I stayed hidden until nightfall, then started walking, following the road. 3 days later, another group found me. They weren't kind." She swallowed hard. "They brought me here. Said I'd fetch a good price." "I'm sorry for what you've endured," August said, genuine regret in his voice. "These territories can be lawless, despite the best efforts of men like myself." Margaret looked down at her filthy dress, once a fine traveling costume of blue wool, now torn and stained beyond repair. "What am I to do now? My money, my letters of introduction, everything is gone." August considered for a moment. "Thunder Ridge has no school yet, though we sorely need one. Many families have settled here in the last 2 years, bringing children who receive little formal education." Margaret looked up, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "It would take time to organize," he continued, "but if you're willing to stay, I believe the town council would support establishing a proper school. In the meantime, I know of a respectable boarding house where you could stay. The proprietress, Mrs. Henderson, is always looking for help." "You would do this for a stranger?" Margaret asked, suspicious despite her desperate circumstances. August smiled, a genuine warmth lighting his features. "Education is the future of the West, Miss Wilson. Besides, Mrs. Henderson's cooking is terrible. The boarders would welcome someone new in the kitchen." Despite everything, Margaret found herself returning his smile. "I'm a terrible cook, Sheriff Ironwood. My talents lie in literature and mathematics." He laughed, the sound rich and unexpected. "Then the situation remains dire, But at least the children of Thunder Ridge will be well educated while suffering Mrs. Henderson's biscuits. For the first time since the stagecoach attack, Margaret felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps her journey west wasn't ending in disaster after all, but merely taking an unexpected turn. August Ironwood watched Miss Wilson carefully as she finished her water. Despite her ordeal, there was a quiet dignity about her that impressed him. Her honey blonde hair had come loose from what had once been a tidy arrangement, and her green eyes, though wary, showed intelligence and resilience. "If you're feeling up to it, I'll take you to Mrs. Henderson's now," he offered. "You can rest properly there, have a hot meal, and a bath." At the mention of a bath, Margaret's eyes lit up with such longing that August had to suppress a smile. "That sounds heavenly," she admitted. "I should warn you," he said, as he offered his arm to help her stand. "People will talk. This is a small town, and newcomers are subject to scrutiny. Being brought in by the sheriff after that spectacle in the square will cause gossip." Margaret lifted her chin. "I've done nothing wrong, Sheriff Ironwood. I won't cower as if I have." "August," he said. "Please call me August." She hesitated, then nodded. "August, then. And I'm Margaret." As they stepped outside, Margaret squinted against the bright afternoon sun. Thunder Ridge was larger than she had expected, a proper town rather than a mere settlement. The main street featured several substantial buildings constructed of timber and stone, including a general store, a saloon, a small church, and what appeared to be a bank. Horses were hitched at various posts, and wagons rumbled past, raising dust from the unpaved street. People paused in their activities to stare as August escorted her down the boardwalk. Margaret forced herself to walk tall despite her disheveled appearance, though she couldn't help noticing how August positioned himself slightly between her and the curious onlookers. "Don't mind them," he said quietly. "News travels fast here, but so do news stories. By next week, someone else will be the subject of interest." "Sheriff!" A portly man with impressive mutton chop whiskers hurried toward them from the direction of a building with Thunder Ridge Sentinel painted on its window. "Sheriff Ironwood, a moment of your time." August sighed. "Mr. Perkins, our local newspaper man," he explained to Margaret before addressing the approaching man. "This isn't a good time, Perkins." The journalist ignored him, his gaze fixed eagerly on Margaret. "Miss, I understand you were the unfortunate subject of an illegal auction today. The readers of the Sentinel would be most interested in your harrowing tale." "Mr. Perkins," August interrupted, his voice taking on a steely quality that Margaret hadn't heard before. "Miss Wilson has endured enough today without being hounded by the press. You'll kindly step aside and allow us to pass." Perkins deflated slightly but persisted. "The public has a right to know about criminal activities in our town, Sheriff, especially ones conducted so brazenly in broad daylight. Where were you when this poor lady was being sold like—" "I was doing my job," August cut in sharply. "Which included ensuring Miss Wilson's safety without bloodshed. Now, I suggest you direct your questions to my office tomorrow if you're concerned about law enforcement in Thunder Ridge." Properly chastened, Perkins stepped back, though his eyes still gleamed with journalistic interest as they continued past. "I apologize for that," August said as they turned onto a quieter side street. "Perkins means well, but he has the restraint of an overeager puppy." "It's all right," Margaret assured him. "I understand the importance of a free press, even when it's inconvenient." August looked at her with renewed interest. "You're surprisingly forgiving for someone who's been through what you have." Margaret was quiet for a moment before responding. "My father was a professor of philosophy before he passed. He always taught me that maintaining one's principles in difficult times is what truly defines character." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," she said softly. "Both my parents died of influenza 2 years ago. Teaching was my way of honoring their belief in education and building a new life for myself." They had reached a two-story clapboard house set back from the street, with a neat garden and a wide porch. A wooden sign reading Henderson House hung beside the door. "Here we are," August said, escorting her up the steps and knocking firmly on the door. It swung open to reveal a stout woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun. Sharp eyes took in Margaret's bedraggled state with a single sweep. "Sheriff Ironwood," she greeted him, her tone revealing nothing of her thoughts. "This must be the young lady I've been hearing about." "Mrs. Henderson, this is Miss Margaret Wilson," August said formally. "She's had a difficult journey and needs accommodation. I mentioned you might have room available and, perhaps, a position as well." Mrs. Henderson's gaze softened slightly as she addressed Margaret directly. "You poor dear. Come in, come in. We'll get you settled." The boarding house interior was clean and modestly furnished, with a parlor to the right of the entrance hall and a dining room visible beyond. The scent of something baking not entirely successfully, judging by the slight burnt smell wafted from what must be the kitchen. "Thank you for your help, Sheriff," Mrs. Henderson said, clearly dismissing him. August hesitated, looking at Margaret. "Will you be all right?" The concern in his voice warmed something inside her that had gone cold during her ordeal. "Yes. Thank you. For everything." He nodded, touching the brim of his hat. "I'll check on you tomorrow, Miss Wilson. Mrs. Henderson, good day to you." As the door closed behind him, Margaret felt suddenly bereft, as if a shield had been removed. Mrs. Henderson must have sensed her discomfort, for her voice softened. "Now then, Miss Wilson, let's get you upstairs for a hot bath. After that, we'll see about some clean clothes and a proper meal. You can tell me your story when you're feeling more yourself." Margaret followed gratefully, exhaustion finally catching up with her. As Mrs. Henderson led her up the stairs, she glanced back at the front door, thinking of August Ironwood and his unexpected kindness. In the chaos of the day, one moment stood out with startling clarity: the look in his eyes when he'd removed the sack from her head and whispered, "An angel." The memory brought an unexpected flutter to her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger or fear. Later, as she sank into a copper tub filled with gloriously hot water, Margaret allowed herself to truly relax for the first time in weeks. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, she was safe. And in the wild frontier of Montana Territory, that was no small blessing. Dawn broke over Thunder Ridge, casting long shadows across the dusty main street as August made his morning rounds. He'd slept poorly, his dreams haunted by green eyes and the haunted expression on Margaret Wilson's face. Something about her had gotten under his skin in a way no woman had before. He paused outside the jail to check that all was secure before continuing toward Henderson House. He told himself it was his duty to ensure Miss Wilson had settled in comfortably, that she wasn't suffering ill effects from her ordeal. The flutter of anticipation in his chest at the thought of seeing her again was merely professional concern, nothing more. The boarding house was already active, smoke curling from the kitchen chimney and the sound of voices drifting through open windows. August straightened his vest and adjusted his hat before climbing the porch steps and knocking. The door opened to reveal not Mrs. Henderson but Margaret herself, looking transformed from the day before. Her hair was neatly arranged, and she wore a simple gray dress that, while clearly borrowed and a bit too large, was clean and presentable. The dark smudges under her eyes had faded, though weariness still lined her face. "Sheriff Ironwood," she greeted him, a smile brightening her features. "Good morning." "Miss Wilson," he replied, suddenly feeling awkward. "I hope you slept well?" "Better than I have in weeks," she admitted, stepping back to allow him entry. "Mrs. Henderson has been extraordinarily kind." As if summoned by her name, the boarding house proprietress appeared from the direction of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sheriff, you're just in time for breakfast. Miss Wilson was helping me serve." August removed his hat. I don't want to impose nonsense, Mrs. Henderson interrupted. You're practically skin and bones from eating your own cooking. Sit down and have a proper meal. Caught between amusement and embarrassment, August allowed himself to be ushered into the dining room, where several other boarders were already seated. He recognized all of them. Thunder Ridge wasn't large enough for strangers to go unnoticed. There was Mr. Finch, the telegraph operator, the Wilkins sisters, who ran the millinery shop, and Dr. Collins, the town's only physician. "Good morning, Sheriff," Dr. Collins greeted him. "Joining us for breakfast?" "It seems I am," August replied, taking the empty chair Mrs. Henderson indicated. Margaret moved efficiently around the table, pouring coffee and serving plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits. When she reached August, he caught a faint scent of lavender soap. "Coffee, Sheriff?" she asked, pot poised over his cup. "Please, and I thought we agreed on August." A slight blush colored her cheeks. "Yes, of course. August." Mrs. Henderson watched this exchange with raised eyebrows but said nothing. The meal progressed pleasantly, with conversation flowing around the table. Margaret participated occasionally, her quick wit and intelligence evident in her responses. August noticed how the other boarders seemed to warm to her presence, even the somewhat standoffish Wilkins sisters. "Miss Wilson was just telling us about her background in education," Dr. Collins said, addressing August. "I mentioned that my Penny and several other children in town receive only the most rudimentary schooling from Reverend Taylor when he can spare the time." August nodded. "I was thinking along similar lines yesterday. Thunder Ridge has grown enough to justify a proper school." "But where would such a school be housed?" asked Florence Wilkins, the elder of the sisters. "And who would pay for it?" "The town hall has that large back room that's hardly used," August suggested. "As for funding, I believe the town council would support allocating resources for education, especially if enough families express interest." Margaret set down the coffee pot. "I wouldn't require much in terms of salary, especially at first. Just enough for room, board, and basic necessities." "That's very generous," Dr. Collins said, "but teachers deserve fair compensation. Miss Wilson." "I agree," August added, "and proper quarters. The position should come with housing." Mrs. Henderson sniffed. "Well, she's welcome here as long as needed, but a schoolteacher ought to have her own place. Shows the right standing in the community." The conversation continued in this vein, with practical matters of establishing a school being discussed with increasing enthusiasm. August watched Margaret's face come alive as she shared her ideas about curriculum and teaching methods. Her passion was infectious, and by the time breakfast concluded, a tentative plan had formed. "I'll speak to Mayor Hollister today," August promised as he prepared to leave. "With your permission, I'll present you as a candidate for the teaching position, Miss Wilson." "I would be most grateful," she replied. As they stood on the porch, momentarily alone while Mrs. Henderson saw the other boarders off, August found himself reluctant to leave. "How are you truly faring?" he asked quietly. "Yesterday was difficult." Margaret's composed expression faltered slightly. "I'm managing. Mrs. Henderson insists I rest today, but honestly, I prefer to keep busy." "It prevents dwelling on what might have happened if you hadn't intervened." "But I did intervene," he reminded her gently. "And those responsible won't go unpunished. I've sent telegrams to neighboring towns asking for information on similar incidents. This wasn't their first auction, I'm certain." Margaret shuddered slightly. "Have there been other women?" "Mostly men," August explained. "Drifters, prospectors, people without connections who wouldn't be missed. Forced labor is valuable in mining operations. But yes, occasionally women too." "How terrible," she whispered. "The West is still wild in many ways," August acknowledged. "But it's changing. People like you help civilize it." She looked up at him, her green eyes intent. "People like us, you mean? Law and education. working together. The way she said it, as if they were already partners in some greater endeavor, stirred something in August's chest. He cleared his throat. I should continue my rounds. Will you be all right here today? Perfectly fine, she assured him. Mrs. Henderson has already enlisted my help with mending and correspondence. Apparently, her eyesight isn't what it used to be, and she's fallen behind on her letters. August smiled. She's been complaining about needing reading glasses for 2 years but refuses to admit it. You've done her a kindness by offering to help. It's the least I can do after her generosity. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before August reluctantly put his hat back on. Good day, Margaret. I'll return with news from the mayor when I have it. I look forward to it. August. As he walked away, August couldn't help but glance back. Margaret still stood on the porch, watching him go. When their eyes met, she smiled a genuine smile that transformed her face and sent a jolt through him like summer lightning. For the first time in years, August Ironwood found himself whistling as he continued his morning patrol. Margaret spent the morning helping Mrs. Henderson with household tasks, grateful for the normalcy of domestic routines after weeks of uncertainty and fear. The boarding house keeper proved to be less stern than her initial appearance suggested, sharing stories of Thunder Ridge's early days as they worked. This was barely more than a trading post when my Harold and I arrived 8 years ago, Mrs. Henderson explained as they hung laundry in the back garden. Just the saloon, a general store, and a handful of cabins. Harold built this house himself, said a proper town needed proper accommodations. He sounds like a forward-thinking man, Margaret commented, pinning a sheet to the line. He was. A shadow of grief passed over the older woman's face. Pneumonia took him 3 winters ago. I considered returning east afterward. But by then, this had become home. Margaret impulsively touched the woman's arm. I'm sorry for your loss. Mrs. Henderson patted her hand. Thank you, dear. Now, tell me more about this school you're hoping to establish. What ages would you teach? As they continued working, Margaret outlined her educational philosophy and experience. She had taught briefly at a small school in Connecticut before deciding to venture west, and her enthusiasm for teaching was evident in every word. You know, Mrs. Henderson said thoughtfully as they finished with the laundry. There's a small cottage at the edge of town that might suit for a schoolteacher's residence. It belonged to old Mr. Fenton before he passed last winter. His nephew inherited it but lives in Denver and has no interest in it. Last I heard, he was looking to sell. Margaret's heart quickened at the thought of having her own home. That sounds promising, though I don't know when I'll have funds to purchase property. The town council might consider acquiring it as part of establishing the school, Mrs. Henderson suggested. Sheriff Ironwood seems quite determined to see you settled here. Something in the woman's tone made Margaret glance up sharply. Mrs. Henderson was watching her with knowing eyes. He's been very kind, Margaret said carefully. Indeed, Mrs. Henderson agreed, more so than I've seen him with anyone since he came to Thunder Ridge 3 years ago. Margaret busied herself folding the laundry basket, hoping her flushed cheeks weren't too noticeable. He's simply doing his duty as sheriff. If you say so, dear. Mrs. Henderson's voice held a hint of amusement, though most sheriffs don't look at their duty the way he looks at you. Before Margaret could formulate a response, a knock at the front door interrupted them. Mrs. Henderson went to answer it, returning moments later with a young boy of about 12. Miss Wilson, this is Tommy Collins, the doctor's son. He has a message for you. The boy removed his cap, revealing a shock of red hair. Pa sent me to fetch you, madam. The mayor wants to meet you at the town hall right away. Sheriff Ironwood's there, too. Margaret's heart skipped. Thank you, Tommy. Please tell them I'll be there shortly. After the boy departed, Margaret hurried to make herself presentable, borrowing a shawl from Mrs. Henderson to supplement her borrowed dress. The older woman fussed over her appearance, tucking stray hairs into place and insisting she take a small reticule that matched the shawl. First impressions matter in a small town, Mrs. Henderson advised. Mayor Hollister is a good man, but his wife influences his decisions more than he'll admit. If she approves of you, the school is as good as established. Thank you for the advice, Margaret said, genuinely grateful. And for everything else. Mrs. Henderson waved away her thanks. Off with you now. Don't keep the mayor waiting. The town hall was a substantial building in the center of town, constructed of local stone with a proud wooden cupola. Margaret climbed the steps with trepidation, smoothing her borrowed dress and taking a deep breath before entering. Inside, voices echoed from a room to the right. She followed the sound to find August deep in conversation with a distinguished-looking older man and a petite, elegantly dressed woman. All three looked up as she entered. "Ah, Miss Wilson," August said, coming forward to greet her. "Thank you for coming so promptly. Allow me to introduce Mayor William Hollister and his wife, Eugenia." The mayor stepped forward to shake her hand. "Miss Wilson, a pleasure. Sheriff Ironwood has been singing your praises all morning." "Has he?" Margaret couldn't help glancing at August, who looked uncharacteristically discomfited. "Indeed," Mrs. Hollister interjected, approaching to examine Margaret with a frankness that might have been offensive from someone less gracious. "He tells us you're a trained educator from Connecticut. How fortunate for Thunder Ridge that circumstances brought you to us, though I am deeply sorry for the manner of your arrival." "Thank you, Mrs. Hollister." Margaret was impressed by the woman's direct approach. "I believe good can sometimes come from difficult circumstances." "A philosophical outlook?" the mayor observed approvingly. "Exactly the sort of wisdom our young people need." The conversation flowed easily as they seated themselves around a large table. Mayor Hollister outlined the town's needs and resources, while his wife asked perceptive questions about Margaret's qualifications and teaching experience. August remained mostly silent, though Margaret was acutely aware of his steady gaze. "Well," the mayor said finally, "I believe we've heard enough to make a decision. Thunder Ridge would be honored to have you establish our school, Miss Wilson. The town council will provide the necessary funds for basic supplies and a modest salary. We can use the town hall initially, with an eye toward building a proper schoolhouse next year if enrollment warrants it." Margaret's heart soared. "Thank you, Mayor Hollister. I won't disappoint you." "As for housing," Mrs. Hollister added, "we agree with Sheriff Ironwood's suggestion regarding the Fenton cottage. The town will purchase it for use as the teacher's residence. It needs some repairs, but it should be ready within a week or two." "My own home?" Margaret couldn't hide her surprise and delight. "That's more than I dared hope for." "A teacher needs appropriate standing in the community," Mrs. Hollister said firmly, "and privacy for lesson preparation. It's settled then. William, shall we announce it at church on Sunday?" The mayor nodded. "Perfect timing. Most families attend, so word will spread quickly. We could aim to begin classes the following Monday." "So soon?" Margaret asked. "No time like the present," Mayor Hollister said cheerfully. "Unless you need more time to prepare?" "No, That would be wonderful," Margaret assured him, her mind already racing with plans and preparations. "Excellent. Then if you'll excuse us, my wife and I have other appointments this afternoon." The mayor stood, helping Mrs. Hollister to her feet. "Sheriff Ironwood can show you the cottage if you'd like to see it today." After the Hollisters departed, Margaret turned to August, who had remained seated. "You've been busy on my behalf," she said, torn between gratitude and a strange sense that events were moving too quickly. He rubbed the back of his neck, a disarmingly boyish gesture from such a composed man. "I hope I haven't overstepped. When I spoke with the mayor this morning, he was immediately enthusiastic about establishing a school. The cottage suggestion came naturally from there." "It's not that," Margaret assured him. "I'm grateful, truly. It's just, everything is happening so fast. 2 days ago, I was being sold at auction, And now I'm about to become Thunder Ridge's schoolteacher with my own home. August's expression softened. Life can change in an instant out here, for better or worse. But if it's too much too soon... No, Margaret interrupted. It's perfect, actually. Having purpose again, a place in the community, it's exactly what I need. Relief washed over his features. In that case, would you like to see your future home? I would love to. They walked together through town, August occasionally greeting people they passed. Margaret noticed the curious glances directed their way, but held her head high, refusing to be cowed by speculation. People will talk less once you're established as the schoolteacher, August said, correctly interpreting her thoughts. Though I should warn you, in a town this size, your personal life will never be entirely your own. I've nothing to hide, Margaret replied, though I do value my privacy. As do I, August agreed. It's one of the challenges of being a public figure in a small community. Everyone feels entitled to an opinion on how you conduct yourself. There was something in his tone that made Margaret wonder what criticisms he had endured as sheriff. Before she could consider asking, they turned onto a quiet lane at the eastern edge of town. Here we are, August announced, stopping before a small but charming cottage set back from the road. A picket fence, in need of paint but otherwise intact, surrounded a yard overgrown with wildflowers and grass. The cottage itself was weathered but solid-looking, with a covered porch and 2 windows flanking the front door. Oh, Margaret breathed, immediately charmed. It's lovely. It needs work, August cautioned, opening the gate for her. Fenton was a bachelor his whole life and not much for housekeeping, especially in his later years. As they approached the porch, Margaret noticed loose boards and peeling paint. Nothing that can't be fixed, she said optimistically. August produced a key from his pocket. Mayor Hollister gave me this. Shall we look inside? The interior was dusty and cluttered with the previous owner's belongings, but Margaret barely noticed. She moved through the small parlor to the kitchen beyond, taking in the stone fireplace, the built-in cupboards, and the large windows that let in streams of afternoon sunlight. There are 2 bedrooms through there, August said, indicating a short hallway, and a pantry off the kitchen. The well outside is good. I checked it myself last month when we were inventorying Fenton's property. Margaret turned slowly, trying to imagine the space clean and arranged with her own meager possessions. It's perfect, she decided. Absolutely perfect. August smiled, pleasure evident in his blue eyes. I hoped you'd like it. I can arrange for some men to clear out Fenton's things and make repairs. Mrs. Henderson might help you acquire what you need for setting up house. You've thought of everything, Margaret said, genuinely touched by his consideration. Not everything, he admitted. But I'm trying to make amends for how you arrived in our town. You have nothing to make amends for, Margaret insisted. You saved me. Their eyes met and held for a long moment. Margaret became acutely aware of how alone they were in the empty cottage, how improper it might seem to others. Yet she felt no fear, only a strange, fluttering anticipation. August seemed to realize the impropriety at the same moment. He cleared his throat and stepped back. We should return to town. People will wonder where we've gone. Of course, Margaret agreed, though part of her wished to remain in this moment, in this space that would soon be hers. With this man who had changed the course of her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. As they walked back toward the center of town, side by side but not touching, Margaret stole glances at August's profile. What was it about this man that affected her so? Was it merely gratitude for his rescue, or something deeper? Whatever it was, she had time to discover the answer. For the first time since leaving Connecticut, Margaret Wilson felt the stirrings of hope for a future she might actually want, one very different from what she had planned, but perhaps all the better for it. The next week passed in a flurry of activity as Thunder Ridge prepared for the opening of its first proper school. True to his word, August organized a group of men to clear out the Fenton cottage and make necessary repairs. Margaret divided her time between helping Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house, preparing lessons for her future students, and visiting her cottage to direct the cleaning and organizing efforts. Word of the new school spread quickly. Parents began approaching Margaret around town, introducing themselves and their children. By Saturday, she had a list of 28 potential students ranging in age from 6 to 16. "You'll have your hands full," Dr. Collins remarked when she showed him the list during dinner at the boarding house. "That's quite an age range to teach simultaneously." "I'll establish a system," Margaret assured him. "The older children can help with the younger ones for certain subjects. It works well in one-room schoolhouses." "Miss Wilson is more than capable," August commented from across the table. He had taken to joining them for dinner most evenings, a fact that had not gone unnoticed by Mrs. Henderson or the other boarders. Margaret felt a flush of pleasure at his confidence in her abilities. Over the past week, they had fallen into an easy companionship, with August often escorting her on errands around town or stopping by the cottage to check on the renovation progress. Each interaction strengthened the connection between them, a quiet understanding that neither acknowledged aloud, but both increasingly relied upon. On Sunday morning, Margaret dressed with particular care in a new navy blue dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her acquire from the Wilkins sisters' shop. Her trunk and possessions from the stagecoach robbery were long gone, forcing her to rebuild her wardrobe from scratch. The dress was simpler than what she would have chosen in Connecticut, but it suited her new life in Thunder Ridge. She walked to church with Mrs. Henderson, conscious of the many eyes upon her. The church was the most impressive building in town aside from the bank, constructed of sturdy logs with a proper steeple. Inside, rough-hewn pews were arranged in neat rows, already filling with families in their Sunday best. Mrs. Henderson led her to a pew near the front, where Dr. Collins and his family were already seated. Tommy Collins waved enthusiastically, and his younger sister Penny regarded Margaret with shy interest. As the congregation settled, Margaret glanced around, looking for August. She spotted him standing at the back, leaning against the wall rather than taking a seat. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave her a small nod that somehow conveyed both respect and something more personal that made her heart beat faster. Reverend Taylor, a thin man with kind eyes and a resonant voice, began the service. Margaret found comfort in the familiar rhythms of worship, though the congregation's enthusiastic but somewhat unpolished singing brought a smile to her lips. This was a far cry from the formal services of her Connecticut church, but the sincerity of the worshippers was unmistakable. After the sermon, Mayor Hollister rose to make announcements. Margaret straightened as he mentioned the new school. "As many of you already know, Thunder Ridge has been blessed with the arrival of a qualified teacher," the mayor announced. "Miss Margaret Wilson has graciously agreed to establish our town's first proper school, which will open tomorrow in the town hall. All children between the ages of 6 and 16 are encouraged to attend. Miss Wilson, would you please stand so everyone can see you?" Margaret rose, feeling a flutter of nervousness as all eyes turned to her. She managed a poised smile, inclining her head in acknowledgement of the murmurs of approval. "We are most fortunate," Mayor Hollister continued, "that Miss Wilson was brought to our community, though the circumstances were most unfortunate. I'm sure you'll all join me in making her feel welcome." As Margaret sat down, she was acutely aware of the undercurrent in the mayor's words. Everyone in town had heard some version of her arrival by now, though August had done his best to downplay the auction aspect in official accounts. After the service, Margaret found herself surrounded by parents eager to introduce themselves and their children. She did her best to remember names and faces, answering questions about schedules and necessary supplies with patience. "You're a natural diplomat," a familiar voice commented when the crowd finally thinned. August stood nearby, hat in hand, watching her with undisguised admiration. Hardly, Margaret laughed, but teaching requires a certain amount of public relations skill, especially with parents. Will you walk with me? He asked suddenly. There's something at your cottage I'd like to show you. Intrigued, Margaret agreed, making her excuses to Mrs. Henderson, who watched their departure with knowing eyes. They walked in comfortable silence through town. Thunder Ridge on a Sunday afternoon had a peaceful quality, with most businesses closed and families gathered at home for their main meal of the week. Are you nervous about tomorrow? August asked as they turned onto the lane leading to her cottage. A little, Margaret admitted, but mostly excited. Teaching gives me purpose, and these children deserve a proper education. The town is fortunate to have you, August said quietly. I am fortunate. The simple statement hung between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to fully express. Margaret glanced at him, taking in his strong profile and the way sunlight caught in his dark hair. I'm the fortunate one, she replied. Without you, I don't like to think where I might be now. They reached the cottage gate, and Margaret stopped in surprise. The yard had been completely transformed. The overgrown grass was neatly trimmed, the wildflowers organized into proper beds, and the picket fence freshly painted white. On the porch sat a rocking chair that hadn't been there the day before. August, what? He opened the gate for her, a hint of nervousness in his expression. Several of us worked on it yesterday after you left. I wanted it to be ready for you to move in today, if you wish. Overwhelmed, Margaret walked slowly up the path and climbed the porch steps. The boards that had been loose were now secured, the railings sturdy under her hand. She ran her fingers over the rocking chair, recognizing it as similar to one Mrs. Henderson had in her parlor. It's beautiful, she whispered. There's more inside, August said, producing the key and unlocking the door. The interior had been similarly transformed. Everything was spotlessly clean, the wooden floors polished to a soft glow. The parlor now contained a small sofa, a side table with an oil lamp, and a bookshelf with a dozen or so volumes. In the kitchen, copper pots hung from hooks, and a basket of provisions sat on the table covered with a checkered cloth. The furniture came from various folks around town, August explained as Margaret moved through the space in wonder. Mrs. Henderson donated the sofa, Dr. Collins the bookshelf. The Wilkins sisters provided curtains and linens. Mayor Hollister contributed the books, said every teacher needs a library. And the kitchen things? Margaret asked, touching a gleaming pot with reverent fingers. Some were already here, just needed cleaning. Others came from Mrs. Henderson's overflow. She said you'd need proper equipment even if you claim not to cook well. Margaret laughed, tears pricking her eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll accept it, August urged. The town wants you to feel welcome, to make this your home. And what do you want? August? The question slipped out before she could reconsider it. He looked at her steadily, something intense and vulnerable in his gaze. I want you to be happy here. I want you to stay. The simple honesty of his answer touched something deep within her. I want that too, she whispered. They stood in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Margaret was acutely aware that they were alone in her house, that propriety demanded caution, but in that moment she couldn't bring herself to care. August seemed to read her thoughts. He took a step back, breaking the spell. There's food for several days in the basket. Mrs. Henderson insisted on providing your first meals until you're settled. And there's a cat in the barn out back Fenton's old mouser. She's a good ratter, if you're amenable to keeping her. I've always liked cats, Margaret said, grateful for the return to practical matters. Does she have a name? Fenton called her Lady, though she's about the most unladylike cat I've ever encountered, August replied with a grin. Margaret laughed. Lady it is, then. Thank you, August. For everything. I should go, he said reluctantly. You probably want to settle in, and I have rounds to make. Even on Sunday? Crime doesn't observe the Sabbath, unfortunately, he replied, though things are usually quiet after church. Will I see you tomorrow? Margaret asked, walking him to the door. Count on it. I wouldn't miss Thunder Ridge's first day of school for anything. After he left, Margaret wandered through her new home, running her hands over furniture and opening cupboards, still hardly able to believe that all this was hers. In the larger bedroom, she found a beautiful quilt spread across the bed and a small vase of wildflowers on the bedside table. The gesture was so thoughtful it brought tears to her eyes again. Later, as evening fell, she sat in her rocking chair on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant orange and gold. A gray tabby cat appeared from the direction of the small barn, regarding her suspiciously from the bottom of the porch steps. Hello, lady, Margaret called softly. It seems we're both starting fresh. The cat blinked slowly, then turned and disappeared back into the gathering dusk. Margaret smiled, not offended by the feline's caution. They would have time to become acquainted, just as she would have time to become truly part of Thunder Ridge. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Margaret thought about the next day, her first as a teacher in her new town, and about August Ironwood, whose blue eyes seemed to see into her very soul. Whatever the future held, she was no longer afraid to face it. For the first time since the stagecoach attack, she felt truly at peace. The town hall hummed with excitement as children of all ages filled the back room that would serve as Thunder Ridge's schoolroom. Margaret stood at the front, watching as parents helped their offspring find seats at the tables and benches that had been arranged in rows. August and Mayor Hollister had worked with several men to set up the space the previous afternoon, positioning a blackboard and desk for her use. Good morning, everyone, Margaret called when the clock struck 9. The chatter gradually subsided as curious faces turned toward her. My name is Miss Wilson, and I am honored to be your teacher. 26 students had arrived for the first day, ranging from solemn 6-year-old Sarah Jenkins to 16-year-old James Walker, who slouched in his seat with an air of someone who'd rather be elsewhere. Margaret took attendance from her list, connecting names to faces and making mental notes about family groupings. Before we begin our lessons, I'd like to assess what each of you already knows, she explained. This will help me organize our studies most effectively. The morning passed quickly as Margaret moved between age groups, giving simple reading and arithmetic tests to gauge abilities. As she had suspected, the educational levels varied widely. Some of the older children read quite well, while others struggled with basic letters. A few showed surprising aptitude for mathematics, while others needed to master fundamental concepts. By noon, when she dismissed them for the midday meal, Margaret had a clearer picture of the challenges ahead. Most would return to their homes for lunch, but a few whose parents worked in town had brought food with them. Margaret had packed a simple meal for herself, planning to eat at her desk while organizing afternoon lessons. As the last child departed, a knock at the doorway drew her attention. August stood there, holding a covered basket. I thought you might appreciate something better than whatever you packed, he said, entering the room. Mrs. Henderson sent this over. Margaret smiled gratefully. That was thoughtful of her. And you, for delivering it. August set the basket on her desk, removing the cloth to reveal a thermos of hot soup, fresh bread, and apple slices. How was the morning? Challenging but rewarding, Margaret replied, accepting the soup with appreciation. The children are eager to learn, though their previous education has been inconsistent. Reverend Taylor did his best, August said, leaning against a nearby table. But he's not a trained teacher, and he could only spare a few hours each week. I'm not criticizing, Margaret assured him. Under the circumstances, they've done remarkably well. Several of the older children read quite proficiently. They talked comfortably as Margaret ate, August sharing tidbits about various families that might help her understand her students better. His insights were thoughtful and kind, revealing his deep connection to the community. "You care a great deal about this town," Margaret observed. August nodded. "Thunder Ridge gave me a second chance when I needed one. I owe it my best." "A second chance?" she asked, curious about his past. A shadow crossed his face. "That's a story for another time." Before Margaret could respond, children began returning for afternoon lessons. August straightened, touching the brim of his hat. "I should let you get back to work, teacher," he said with a smile that sent warmth through her. "Good luck with the afternoon session." The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity as Margaret began establishing routines and assigning lessons appropriate to each student's level. By the time she dismissed the class at 4 o'clock, she was exhausted but deeply satisfied. "Miss Wilson?" A small voice interrupted her thoughts as she erased the blackboard. Margaret turned to find Penny Collins standing nearby, clutching a book to her chest. "Yes, Penny. Did you forget something?" The girl shook her head, her brown curls bouncing. "No, madam. I just wanted to say thank you for today. I've been wanting a real school forever." Margaret's heart melted at the child's earnestness. "You're very welcome, Penny. I think you'll make an excellent student." "Pa says learning is important if I want to be a doctor someday," Penny confided. "He says girls can be doctors too, even if some people don't think so." "Your father is right," Margaret affirmed. "With hard work and determination, you can achieve anything you set your mind to." Penny beamed. "That's what Sheriff Ironwood says too. He gave me this book about a lady doctor." She held up the volume she'd been clutching. "Did he now?" Margaret examined the book, a biography of Elizabeth Blackwell, America's first female physician. "That was very thoughtful of him." "Sheriff Ironwood is the nicest man in town," Penny declared with childish certainty. "Pa says he had a hard life before coming here, but you'd never know it 'cause he's always helping everybody." "Your father and the sheriff are good friends?" Penny nodded vigorously. "Pa fixed his arm when it got shot last year. And Sheriff Ironwood comes for dinner sometimes. He tells the best stories." Margaret filed away these nuggets of information, her curiosity about August growing. "Well, I'm glad he encouraged your interest in medicine. Perhaps you can share what you learned from that book with the class someday." After Penny departed, Margaret gathered her materials and locked the town hall as Mayor Hollister had instructed. The afternoon sun was warm on her face as she walked toward her cottage, mind already planning the next day's lessons. The first week of school established a rhythm to Margaret's new life in Thunder Ridge. Each day brought fresh challenges and rewards as she guided her diverse group of students. Word of the school's success spread quickly, and by Friday, 3 more children had joined the class. August became a regular visitor, often stopping by the schoolroom at noon or escorting Margaret home in the afternoons. Their conversations ranged from town matters to literature to philosophy, each discussion revealing new dimensions of compatibility that deepened their connection. On Friday afternoon, as they walked together toward her cottage, August seemed unusually thoughtful. "Is something troubling you?" Margaret asked, concerned by his distraction. He hesitated before responding. "I received a telegram today from the sheriff in Copper Creek. They've captured 2 men believed to be part of the gang that's been conducting human auctions throughout the territory." Margaret stopped walking, her heart suddenly racing. "The men who captured me?" "Possibly," August confirmed. "They're being held for trial, but the sheriff there wants me to come identify them. I've been gathering accounts from other victims over the past weeks." "When will you go?" "Tomorrow morning. It's a 2-day ride each way, so I'll be gone about a week." He looked at her intently. "Will you be all right while I'm away?" The concern in his voice warmed her even as the prospect of his absence created a hollow feeling in her chest. "Of course. I have my students and the cottage to keep me occupied." Deputy Michaels will handle things here, and Dr. Collins has offered to check on you regularly, August continued. And Mrs. Henderson insisted I tell you that you're welcome for meals any time. Margaret smiled despite her unease. It seems you've thought of everything, as usual. They had reached her gate. August opened it for her, but didn't follow her up the path as he sometimes did. Instead, he stood with his hand on the gatepost, an uncharacteristic uncertainty in his posture. Margaret, there's something I want to say before I leave. The seriousness in his tone made her turn to face him fully. Yes? These past 2 weeks, getting to know you? He paused, seemingly searching for words. You've come to mean a great deal to me. More than I expected. More than might be proper, given how recently we met. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. August. Please, let me finish, he said gently. I'm not asking anything of you. I just wanted you to know that my feelings, they're not simply those of a sheriff concerned for a newcomer to his town. When I return, perhaps we might discuss what that could mean, if you're amenable. The careful formality of his words contrasted with the raw emotion in his eyes. Margaret felt a surge of warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. I would like that very much, she replied softly. And since we're being honest, you should know that I share those feelings. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long night. He reached for her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and deeply intimate. Then I have something to look forward to upon my return, he said, his voice husky. Be careful, Margaret urged, reluctant to release his hand. These men sound dangerous. I always am, he assured her. Take care of yourself in our town while I'm gone. Our town, she repeated, liking the sound of it. Yes, I will. With a final gentle squeeze of her hand, August departed, leaving Margaret standing by her gate with her heart lighter than it had been in years, despite the impending separation. That night, as she prepared for bed, a tap at her window startled her. She approached cautiously, lamp in hand, to find Lady the cat perched on the sill, tail twitching imperiously. With a laugh, Margaret opened the window to admit the feline, who sauntered in as if she owned the place. Decided to accept my hospitality at last, have you? Margaret asked as the cat explored the bedroom before settling at the foot of the bed. Lady's only response was a slow blink before closing her eyes completely, apparently having claimed her sleeping spot. Very well, Margaret chuckled. I suppose I could use the company this week. As she extinguished the lamp and settled under the quilt, Margaret thought of August, already preparing for his journey. Though they had known each other barely 2 weeks, she couldn't deny the connection between them, a recognition of kindred spirits that transcended time. Whatever the future held, she knew now that Thunder Ridge was where she belonged, and August Ironwood was a significant reason why. The week of August's absence passed more slowly than Margaret had anticipated. Though her days were filled with teaching and her evenings with lesson preparation, his presence had become such a constant in her new life that she felt the lack of it keenly. Lady proved a faithful, if independent companion, coming and going through the bedroom window at will, but always returning to sleep on Margaret's bed. The townspeople rallied around her, seemingly aware of her connection to their sheriff. Dr. Collins invited her to dinner twice, his daughter Penny chattering happily about school and her medical ambitions. Mrs. Henderson happened to bake too many pies and insisted Margaret take one home. Even the Wilkins sisters, initially reserved, invited her to tea on Sunday afternoon. By the time Wednesday arrived, Margaret had settled into her routines, but still found herself watching the road whenever she had a free moment. August had estimated a week's absence, but travel in the territories was unpredictable at best. On Thursday afternoon, as she dismissed her students, an unfamiliar tension filled the air. Parents arrived earlier than usual to collect their children, speaking in hushed tones and casting concerned glances toward the main street. "Is something wrong, Mrs. Jenkins?" Margaret asked, as Sarah's mother hurried her daughter away. The woman hesitated. "Just rumors, Miss Wilson. Probably nothing to worry about, but best to get the little ones home early today." Uneasy, Margaret gathered her materials and locked the schoolroom. As she stepped onto the boardwalk, she noticed unusual activity down the street, men gathering in front of the saloon, several with rifles visible. "Miss Wilson." Deputy Michaels approached, his young face serious beneath his hat. "I was just coming to find you." "What's happening, Deputy?" He glanced around before responding. "Word came that the Blackwell gang has been spotted in the area. Could be nothing, but with Sheriff Ironwood away, we're taking precautions." The Blackwell gang? The name was vaguely familiar from newspaper accounts. Outlaws. Dangerous ones. The deputy shifted uncomfortably. "Sheriff would want me to see you safely home." Margaret wanted to protest that she could manage on her own, but the genuine concern in the young man's eyes stopped her. "Thank you, Deputy. I appreciate the escort." As they walked toward her cottage, Michaels explained further, "They're the worst kind of criminals, rob stagecoaches, trains, banks, kill without hesitation. Sheriff's been tracking their activities for months." "Is there a connection to the men who captured me?" Margaret asked, remembering August's mission. "Possibly," Michaels admitted. "Some think the Blackwells have been behind the forced labor auctions too, though we've never had proof." This information sent a chill through Margaret. If true, and if the gang knew of August's efforts to identify their members, they might view Thunder Ridge and its sheriff as enemies. When they reached her cottage, Michaels insisted on checking the interior before leaving. "Keep your doors locked tonight, Miss Wilson. And this?" He offered her a small revolver. Margaret stared at the weapon. "I've never used a gun." "It's loaded and ready. Just point and pull the trigger if necessary." His expression was apologetic but firm. "Sheriff Ironwood would have my hide if I didn't make sure you could protect yourself." Reluctantly, Margaret accepted the pistol, setting it on a high shelf in the kitchen where curious students wouldn't spot it if they visited. "Thank you, Deputy. Is there anything else I should know?" "Just stay close to home until we get word the gang has moved on. Or until Sheriff Ironwood returns." He tipped his hat and departed, leaving Margaret alone with her concerns. That night she found sleep elusive. Every creak of the cottage's timbers, every rustle of wind through the trees outside made her start. Lady seemed to sense her unease, remaining unusually close rather than prowling her usual nocturnal route. Friday morning dawned clear and cool. Margaret considered canceling school but decided that maintaining normalcy was important for the children and the town. She dressed carefully, pinning her hair in its usual neat arrangement, and prepared for the day. The pistol remained on its shelf. She couldn't imagine bringing it to school, regardless of potential dangers. The day passed without incident, though attendance was lower than usual. Deputy Michaels appeared at noon and again at dismissal time, escorting Margaret home with reassurances that all remained quiet in Thunder Ridge. His presence was comforting, but she couldn't help wishing for August's steadier, more experienced protection. Saturday brought no relief from the tension. Margaret ventured into town only briefly to purchase necessities from the general store, where hushed conversations ceased as she entered. Mr. Peterson, the proprietor, was overly cheerful as he filled her order. Refusing payment. "On account of your being new to town, Miss Wilson." His uncharacteristic generosity only increased her unease. Back at her cottage, Margaret tried to distract herself with lesson planning and reading, but her attention kept wandering to the window, searching the road for any sign of August's return. As dusk approached, she prepared a simple supper, her appetite diminished by worry. Lady watched from the windowsill, tail twitching occasionally, seemingly as alert as her human companion. The knock, when it came, was so unexpected that Margaret dropped the plate she was drying. It shattered on the floor as she froze, staring toward the door. No one had visited after dark since August's departure. "Miss Wilson?" A female voice called. "It's Eugenia Hollister. May I come in?" Relief washed over Margaret as she hurried to admit the mayor's wife, carefully avoiding the broken china. "Mrs. Hollister, forgive me. You startled me." The older woman entered, elegant even in a practical traveling cloak. "I apologize for calling so late, but William thought you should know immediately." She paused, her expression grave. "We've received word that Sheriff Ironwood was injured during the arrest of those auction conspirators." Margaret's heart seemed to stop. "Injured? How badly? Where is he?" The telegram wasn't specific, only that he was shot during a confrontation but is expected to recover. "He's being treated in Copper Creek and will return when able to travel." "Shot," Margaret repeated, the word like a physical blow. "But he'll recover?" "That's what the telegram said," Mrs. Hollister confirmed, watching Margaret's reaction closely. "My dear, I know you and the sheriff have become close. This must be distressing news." Margaret sank into a chair, struggling to compose herself. "Yes, we've become friends. I'm concerned for him, of course." Mrs. Hollister's expression softened. "More than friends, I think. The whole town has noticed how he looks at you, and you at him." Under normal circumstances, Margaret might have been embarrassed by such directness, but worry for August overshadowed everything else. "When might he return?" The telegram didn't say, but William is sending Deputy Michaels to Copper Creek tomorrow to get a full report and assist Sheriff Ironwood if needed. Mrs. Hollister squeezed Margaret's hand. "Try not to worry too much. From what I understand, August Ironwood has survived worse than a bullet wound." After Mrs. Hollister departed, promising to share any further news immediately, Margaret moved through her evening routine mechanically. She swept up the broken plate, banked the fire, and prepared for bed, all while her mind raced with terrible possibilities. Lady joined her as usual, but sleep remained elusive. Margaret tossed and turned, imagining August wounded and alone in a strange town. The rational part of her mind knew he was receiving care, that Dr. Collins had vouched for his counterpart in Copper Creek as a competent physician. But rationality provided little comfort in the dark hours of the night. Sunday passed in a haze of worry. Margaret attended church, accepting the sympathetic glances and reassurances of the congregation with outward composure. Inside, she vacillated between fear for August's safety and a growing certainty about her feelings for him. The prospect of losing him had crystallized emotions that had been developing since that first day when he'd removed the sack from her head and whispered, "An angel." Monday brought no news. Margaret taught her classes with determined normalcy, refusing to allow her personal concerns to affect her students. The town remained on alert for the Blackwell gang, but no incidents had occurred, leading some to believe the reports had been exaggerated. Tuesday afternoon, as Margaret was writing assignments on the blackboard for the next day, a commotion outside drew her attention. Voices raised in greeting, the clatter of horses' hooves on the packed dirt of the street. Her heart leapt with hope even before Penny Collins burst through the schoolroom door. "Miss Wilson, Sheriff Ironwood is back, and Deputy Michaels, too." Margaret gripped the chalk tightly, struggling to maintain her professional demeanor. "Thank you for the information, Penny. Please take your seat so we can continue with our lesson." The girl looked disappointed by this measured response but complied. Margaret forced herself to complete the school day as planned, though her thoughts were entirely focused on August's return. Was he badly hurt? Would he come to see her? Should she go to him? When the final bell rang and the children departed, Margaret gathered her things with uncharacteristic haste. As she locked the town hall door, she spotted Dr. Collins approaching. "Miss Wilson," he greeted her, "I thought you might want an update on our sheriff's condition." "Yes, please," she replied, abandoning pretense. "How is he?" "Stubborn as ever. the doctor said with a mixture of exasperation and affection. The bullet grazed his side, painful but not life-threatening. He should be resting, but insisted on returning as soon as he heard about the Blackwell gang rumors. Relief made Margaret lightheaded. But he'll recover fully? With proper care and rest, yes. Dr. Collins studied her face. He's asking for you. Says it's about the case, but I suspect his eagerness has more personal motivations. Margaret blushed but didn't deny it. Where is he? At his house. Do you know it? The white clapboard at the north end of town, just past the livery. Margaret realized she had never seen August's home, their interactions having always occurred in public places or at her cottage. I'll find it. Thank you, doctor. He needs rest, Collins cautioned. Try not to let him overexert himself. The implications of that statement brought another flush to Margaret's cheeks, but the doctor's expression remained professionally neutral. August's house proved easy to find, a modest but well-maintained structure, set back from the road with a small covered porch. Margaret hesitated at the gate, suddenly aware of the impropriety of calling on a bachelor at his home. But concern for his well-being overrode conventional propriety, and she proceeded to the door. Her knock was answered almost immediately. August stood in the doorway, his tall frame slightly stooped as if in pain. He wore a simple white shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, and dark trousers. His face was pale beneath his tan, with shadows under his eyes speaking of pain and exhaustion. But his smile when he saw her was radiant. Margaret, he said, her name like a prayer on his lips. I was hoping you'd come. I heard you were injured, she replied, drinking in the sight of him alive and standing before her. Dr. Collins said you were asking for me. Come in, he invited, stepping back. Please. The interior of his home was neat and masculine, with simple, sturdy furniture and surprisingly well-filled bookshelves. A fire burned in the hearth despite the mild weather, suggesting he felt the chill that often accompanies blood loss. You should be resting, Margaret admonished gently, noting how he moved carefully to avoid straining his injured side. I've rested enough, he insisted, gesturing for her to take a seat on the sofa while he lowered himself carefully into an armchair. I needed to get back to Thunder Ridge to make sure everything was secure. Deputy Michaels handled things well in your absence, Margaret assured him, though everyone will be relieved to have you back. And you? August asked, his blue eyes intent on her face. Were you concerned about my absence? Of course I was, she replied honestly, especially after hearing you'd been shot. A shadow crossed his face. It was careless of me. I should have anticipated resistance. What happened? Margaret asked, leaning forward. August sighed, running a hand through his hair. We identified two of the men involved in the auctions. When we went to arrest them, they had friends waiting. It turned ugly quickly. He grimaced. One got away in the confusion after shooting me. The others are in custody. Were they the ones who took me? Margaret asked hesitantly. Yes, August confirmed. They've been operating throughout the territory for months. The men we captured have implicated others, including some unexpected names. It's bigger than we realized. The Blackwell gang? Margaret asked, remembering Deputy Michaels's comments. August's eyebrows rose. You've heard of them? There were rumors they'd been spotted near Thunder Ridge while you were away. The town was on alert. His expression darkened. That's why I returned as quickly as possible. If Simon Blackwell is involved in these auctions, and if he knows I'm investigating, he might view Thunder Ridge as a target. Is that likely? Margaret asked, a chill running through her at the thought. I don't know, August admitted, but I won't take chances with the town's safety. Or yours. There was such fierce protectiveness in his voice that Margaret's heart quickened. I was worried about you, she said softly. When Mrs. Hollister told me you'd been shot, I thought, I'm not that easy to kill, August assured her with a faint smile. Though this wasn't how I planned to return to you. How did you plan it? She asked, holding his gaze. With flowers, perhaps, or a dinner invitation. His smile turned self-deprecating. Something worthy of the conversation we agreed to have upon my return. Margaret remembered their parting, the acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing between them. We can still have that conversation. August leaned forward despite the pain it clearly caused him. Margaret, I know it's been only a few weeks since we met, but I've never felt this way about anyone before. When I was lying in that doctor's office in Copper Creek, all I could think about was getting back to you, to Thunder Ridge, to home. The simple honesty of his declaration touched her deeply. I feel the same, she admitted. When I heard you were hurt, I realized how important you've become to me, how empty my life would be without you in it. August reached across the space between them, offering his hand. Margaret took it without hesitation, their fingers intertwining. I'm not a perfect man, he said quietly. My past has its dark chapters, but you make me want to be better, to be worthy of whatever this is between us. You don't need to be perfect, Margaret assured him. Just be yourself, the man who saved me, who believes in education, who gives books about female doctors to little girls with big dreams. He looked surprised. Penny told you about that? She admires you greatly, as do I. A moment of silence stretched between them, charged with emotion and possibility. August's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. Where do we go from here? He asked finally. Forward, together, Margaret replied simply. One day at a time. August's smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. I'd like that very much. They talked for hours as afternoon faded into evening, sharing stories of their pasts and hopes for the future. August spoke of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his time as a Union soldier during the war, and the circumstances that had brought him west. Margaret told him of her sheltered upbringing in Connecticut, her parents' emphasis on education, and her decision to seek independence after their deaths. When Margaret finally rose to leave, conscious of propriety and August's need for rest, he walked her to the door despite her protests. May I call on you properly once I'm recovered? He asked, still holding her hand. Court you as you deserve? I would like nothing better, she replied, her heart full. Though the town will talk. Let them, August said with unexpected fierceness. I've spent too much of my life concerned with others' opinions. What matters is what's between us. Impulsively, Margaret raised herself on tiptoes and pressed a kiss to his cheek. Rest and heal quickly, Sheriff Ironwood. Thunder Ridge needs you. His free hand came up to touch the spot her lips had touched. And you, Margaret Wilson? Do you need me too? More than I ever expected to need anyone, she admitted softly before stepping into the gathering darkness, her heart lighter than it had been in days despite the lingering concerns about outlaws and danger. As autumn settled over Thunder Ridge, the relationship between the town's sheriff and schoolteacher blossomed like wildflowers after spring rain. August recovered from his wound under Margaret's watchful eye, and by October, he had returned to full duties. The threat of the Blackwell gang receded as reports placed them farther west, though August maintained vigilance in case they returned. The school flourished under Margaret's guidance. With August's support, the town council approved construction of a proper schoolhouse to be completed before winter set in. Margaret threw herself into the planning, incorporating ideas from her Eastern education while adapting to frontier realities. True to his word, August courted her with old-fashioned propriety that nonetheless failed to quell town gossip. They attended church together, took Sunday afternoon walks, and shared dinner at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house twice weekly. August brought her wildflowers and books from his own collection, while Margaret knitted him a scarf as the weather turned colder. By November, when the first snow dusted Thunder Ridge with white, no one was surprised when August began speaking with the town's carpenter about expanding Margaret's cottage. The addition of a larger parlor and second bedroom would make the modest home suitable for a family, a future that seemed increasingly certain as their attachment deepened. On a crisp December evening, with Christmas approaching, August invited Margaret to dinner at his home. This in itself was unusual while they spent time alone at her cottage, with the door properly open. They had maintained stricter propriety regarding his house to avoid fueling gossip. "Is something wrong?" Margaret asked as he helped her remove her coat. A fire blazed in the hearth, and the table was set with what appeared to be Mrs. Henderson's best china. "Nothing's wrong," August assured her, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I just wanted tonight to be special." The meal he had prepared was simple but well-cooked beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie that Margaret suspected came from Mrs. Henderson's kitchen rather than his own efforts. Throughout dinner, August seemed distracted, responding to her stories about the school day with absent nods. "August," Margaret said finally, setting down her fork, "you're clearly troubled about something. Please tell me what it is." He met her gaze, resolve replacing uncertainty in his blue eyes. "Not troubled. Just uncertain how to say what needs saying." Rising from his chair, August moved around the table and, to Margaret's surprise, knelt beside her despite the twinge it clearly caused his still healing side. "Margaret Wilson," he began, taking her hands in his, "these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought light and purpose to my days in ways I never imagined possible." Margaret's heart began to race as she realized what was happening. "I know it hasn't been long," August continued, "but out here in the territories, life moves at its own pace. When you find something precious, you don't wait to claim it." From his pocket, he produced a small velvet box. Opening it revealed a simple gold band set with a modest diamond that caught the firelight. "I love you, Margaret. I think I've loved you since the moment I removed that sack and saw your face for the first time. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Margaret's eyes as emotion overwhelmed her. The journey that had begun with terror and uncertainty had led her to this moment, to this man who looked at her with such devotion. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, August. I would be honored to be your wife." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Rising from his knee, he pulled her gently to her feet and into his embrace. Their lips met in a first kiss that held both tenderness and promise, the beginning of a lifetime together. "I was so afraid when I came west," Margaret confessed as they stood with foreheads touching, "afraid of the unknown, of being alone. But now I see it was the path I needed to take to find you." "Even with everything you endured?" August asked, his hands cradling her face. "Even then," she assured him, "for it led me here, to Thunder Ridge, to home." "To us," August whispered, sealing the promise with another kiss. Spring 1876 brought renewal to Thunder Ridge. The new schoolhouse stood proudly at the edge of town, painted white with green shutters and a small bell tower. Inside, 34 students of varying ages learned reading, writing, arithmetic, and history under Margaret's enthusiastic guidance. On a perfect May afternoon, those same students lined the path from the church to the street, tossing flower petals as Margaret and August emerged as husband and wife. Margaret wore a gown of ivory silk that the Wilkins sisters had labored over for weeks, while August cut a handsome figure in a new black suit. The entire town had turned out for the occasion, the celebration serving as both wedding reception and commemoration of Thunder Ridge's continued growth and prosperity. Tables laden with food filled the town square, and fiddle music inspired dancing as the afternoon progressed into evening. "Mrs. Ironwood," August murmured as they shared their first dance as a married couple. "How does it sound?" "Perfect," Margaret replied, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such happiness, "though my students insist on still calling me Miss Wilson at school." "A wise compromise," August agreed with a smile, though I hope they'll adjust to the change eventually. As twilight descended, lanterns were lit around the square, casting a golden glow over the festivities. Margaret and August circulated among their friends and neighbors, accepting congratulations and well wishes with gracious smiles. "I always knew you two were meant for each other," Mrs. Henderson declared, embracing Margaret warmly. "From the very first day when he brought you to my boarding house. Your matchmaking skills are unparalleled," August teased the older woman, "though I maintain I would have found my way to Margaret without assistance." "Perhaps," Mrs. Henderson sniffed, "but certainly not as efficiently." Later, as they prepared to depart for their wedding night at the now expanded cottage that would serve as their home, Dr. Collins approached with a telegram. "Sorry to intrude," he apologized, "but this just arrived from the territorial governor's office, marked urgent." August read the message, his expression shifting from concern to satisfaction. "The Blackwell gang has been captured," he announced to Margaret. "Simon Blackwell and his remaining men were apprehended trying to rob a bank in Helena." "That's wonderful news," Margaret said, sensing how this closure would allow August to fully embrace their future without lingering concerns about the gang's threat. "Indeed it is," he agreed, tucking the telegram into his pocket. "A perfect wedding gift, the knowledge that our town and territory are safer." As the celebration wound down, August helped Margaret into the carriage that would carry them the short distance to their home. The cottage glowed with welcoming light in the gathering darkness, Lady the cat visible in the window keeping watch. "It's not the grand house you might have had in Connecticut," August said, as he lifted her down from the carriage, "but I hope it will be a happy home." "It already is," Margaret assured him, thinking of the months she had spent there and the improvements they had made together. "Because you're in it." In a gesture that drew cheers from the wedding guests who had followed them, August swept Margaret into his arms and carried her across the threshold, mindful of her elaborate gown. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ironwood," he said softly as he set her down in their parlor. "Home," Margaret repeated, the word filled with meaning as she gazed at the man who had saved her life and captured her heart. "I never truly had one until I found you." As their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of their shared future, Margaret reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. From the terror of being auctioned with a sack over her head to becoming the beloved wife of Thunder Ridge's respected sheriff, life had taken an unexpected but ultimately blessed turn. Outside, the wedding guests dispersed into the spring evening, returning to their own homes with hearts warmed by witnessing love triumph over adversity. Inside the cottage, August and Margaret began their life together, their bond forged in the wild frontier of Montana Territory, but destined to grow stronger with each passing day. The sack that had once blinded her was long gone, but August's first words upon removing it, "an angel," had proven prophetic in ways neither could have imagined on that fateful day. For in finding each other, they had discovered a heaven neither had dared to dream existed not in some distant afterlife, but here on earth, in a small frontier town called Thunder Ridge, where love had transformed them both. 5 years later, 1881, the sound of children's laughter echoed through the expanded Ironwood home as Margaret closed her lesson planner and glanced out the window. In the spacious backyard, August was demonstrating proper horseback riding position to their 4-year-old son, James, using a wooden sawhorse as a stand-in for a real mount. Their 2-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, watched from her perch on a quilt, spread under the apple tree that August had planted the year after their wedding. Thunder Ridge had grown substantially in the 5 years since Margaret and August had married. The discovery of silver in the nearby mountains had brought an influx of miners and businessmen, transforming the once small settlement into a proper town with paved streets, a bank, and even a small hotel. The school had expanded to 2 rooms with the addition of a second teacher, allowing Margaret to focus on the older students while maintaining her position as headmistress. August had been appointed county sheriff 2 years prior, giving him jurisdiction over a wider territory, but also providing funds for additional deputies. The promotion had come with increased responsibilities, but also greater stability and respect, a far cry from the dangerous early days when he'd fought outlaws with minimal support. As Margaret watched her family through the window, her heart swelled with contentment. The journey that had begun in terror had led to this moment of profound peace and joy. August caught her eye through the window and smiled, that same smile that still made her pulse quicken after years of marriage. A knock at the front door interrupted her reverie. Margaret opened it to find Tommy Collins, now a tall young man of 17, studying medicine under his father's guidance. "Mrs. Ironwood," he greeted her with a tip of his hat. "Pa sent me to deliver this letter. Said it came special delivery from back east and might be important." "Thank you, Tommy," Margaret replied, accepting the envelope. "How are your studies progressing?" "Well, madam. Pa says I might be ready for medical school in Philadelphia next year." "That's wonderful news," Margaret said warmly, remembering the gangly 12-year-old who had first sat in her classroom. "Your father must be very proud." After Tommy departed, Margaret examined the letter. The return address showed it was from her late parent's solicitor in Connecticut, a man she corresponded with only occasionally regarding the modest investments her father had left her. August entered from the backyard, James riding on his shoulders and Elizabeth in his arms. "Who is at the door?" he asked, setting the children down. "Tommy Collins with a letter from Mr. Harrington in Hartford," Margaret replied, breaking the seal. As she read, her expression changed from curiosity to shock. August noticed immediately, moving to her side. "Margaret, what is it?" "My cousin Edward has died," she said slowly. "He had no children, and apparently named me his heir. Mr. Harrington says the estate is substantial, the house in Hartford, investments, even shares in a railroad company." August absorbed this news thoughtfully. "I'm sorry about your cousin. Were you close?" "Not particularly," Margaret admitted. "He was much older and rather reserved. I visited his home a few times as a child, but we hadn't corresponded in years." "What does this mean for us?" August asked, ever practical. Margaret looked around their comfortable home, at their beautiful children, at the man who had been her rock and partner through 5 years of marriage. "Nothing has to change," she said firmly. "This is our home. Thunder Ridge is where we belong." August smiled, pulling her close. "I agree, but perhaps the funds could be used for something important to you, to us." An idea that had been forming in Margaret's mind for months suddenly crystallized. "The school," she said. "We could establish a proper academy with multiple classrooms, maybe even dormitories for students from outlying areas. Education is still so limited in the territories." "The Thunder Ridge Academy," August mused, warming to the concept, "with scholarships for children who couldn't otherwise afford advanced education." "Exactly," Margaret agreed, excitement building. "We could hire additional teachers with specialized knowledge, perhaps even someone to teach sciences and advanced mathematics." "I can think of no better use for an unexpected inheritance," August said, his eyes reflecting his pride in her vision. "You've already changed so many lives through your teaching. This would extend that impact for generations." Little James tugged at his mother's skirt. "Mama, can I go to the big school too?" Margaret lifted him into her arms, kissing his forehead. "Of course, darling. You and your sister will have every educational opportunity we can provide." That evening, after the children were asleep, Margaret and August sat on their porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The letter from Connecticut lay on the small table beside them, its contents still somewhat surreal. "Do you ever think about how differently our lives might have turned out?" Margaret asked, her head resting on August's shoulder. "If the stagecoach hadn't been robbed, if I had made it to California as planned, or if I hadn't been at the auction that day," August added, his arm tightening around her. I was supposed to be in Cedar Ridge, but a broken wagon wheel delayed my trip. Divine intervention, Mrs. Henderson would call it, Margaret said with a smile. I'm inclined to agree with her, August replied, pressing a kiss to his wife's temple. Some things are meant to be, despite the painful path that leads to them. Margaret thought of the sack that had covered her head that terrible day, the fear and uncertainty she had felt. Then August had removed it, whispered an angel, and changed everything. We should visit your cousin's grave someday, August suggested. Pay our respects to the man whose generosity will help build our academy. I'd like that, Margaret agreed. Perhaps next summer? The children are old enough to travel now, and I've always wanted to show you where I grew up. A family adventure, August said, smiling at the thought. Though I suspect we'll all be glad to return to Thunder Ridge afterward. Without question, Margaret assured him. This is home where we found each other, built our family, and made our life together. As the moon rose over the distant mountains, casting silver light across their porch, Margaret reflected on the strange and beautiful journey that had brought her to this moment. From terror and despair had come love and purpose beyond anything she could have imagined. I love you, August Ironwood, she whispered, turning to meet his gaze. And I love you, Margaret Ironwood, he replied, the words as fervent now as the day they had wed. More with each passing day. Their lips met in a kiss that held the comfort of familiarity and the enduring spark of passion that had drawn them together from the beginning. Behind them, their home stood solid and welcoming, filled with the sleeping presence of their children. Before them stretched a future bright with promise, purpose, and the endless possibilities that come from lives dedicated to each other and to making their corner of the world better for those who would follow. In the wild territories of the American West, they had found not just each other, but a shared mission that would echo through generations to come, a legacy born in an instant of recognition when a sack was removed and an angel revealed.